Um, Next up, we have a presentation from Mr. Frank Onuh on adapting strategies for different demographies. Mr. Onuh is a PhD candidate, soon to be doctor, and instructor at the University of Lethbridge, as well as a co-founder of Social Enterprise in Canada. Before relocating to Canada, he was a trainer for the Google Digital Skills for Africa project and a facilitator for the McKinsey and Company Young Leaders Program Africa. He currently leads the learning and development component of a data camp project that empowers Black, Indigenous people, and people of color community members in Canada. Welcome, Mr. Onuh, and over to you for your presentation. We'll just like to keep an eye on the time, but thanks in advance. You have 7 minutes for your presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Nice meeting every one of us here today. So looking at the topic, adapting pipeline strategies for different demographics, first thing that came to my mind was Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. Which says, and the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. And if you look at those two words, to dress and to keep, that is the etymology, or what I could say the origin, or where God intentionally tells us as humans, as believers, that from the beginning of creation, I've created a pattern or a template or a format that pipeline management is inevitable. All right. So when he puts us in the garden, when he puts a church in place, or when he set a system in place, two responsibilities are very clear. You have to dress it, and then you have to keep it, because the dressing is not enough. When you dress, you multiply. But when you keep, you maintain the consistency of that multiplication. And so this can only be achieved when you have a very clear, detailed, pipeline strategy, as we have been discussing from the beginning up until this moment. And so there is no one-size-fits-all approach, just like Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 22, where he said, to the weak I become weak, and to win the weak, and I become all things to all people. So there is no single strategy, for example, a single approach, or a one-size-fits-all that you can use to accommodate the entire demography. And this is why it becomes very important for us as a church to leverage tech. And I'm happy with what Sophia ERP is doing, because how do I address the need of children? How do I address the need of the young ones, of the youth? How do I address the need of young professionals and the seniors? All right, so these people fall within different demographies. And so how do I match all of them? And how do I find out what is that common factor that unites all of them together as a unit? And this level of insight are things that actually it's almost impossible to get with traditional human eyes, except we have a system that kind of begin to show those connections. What are the divergence and the convergence views in each of those demographies? And so basically, I'll talk on 3 things very quickly. And for these 4 demographics I mentioned, I'll summarize it because of want of time, but I'll focus on the engagement, the communication, and the programs. All right. So how do I engage with each of these demography? How do I communicate with them? And what kind of program do I need to develop for each of these demography? Now, I'll show us this example. I would give us this example. It's a very popular passage I know all of us are very familiar with, in Mark chapter 10, 13 to 16, which shows a very clear picture of these 3 models I've discussed about now: communication, engagement, and program. And so you see, it said people were bringing little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them. So God is bringing people to the church, and the purpose is for the church to place their hands of God on them, to transform their life, for them to become like Christ. But unfortunately, like we see here, the disciples rebuked them. So this rebuking is not something that is intentional. They think they are doing it for a good purpose. There are I think somebody mentioned initially about resistance to implementation of tech in the church, which is a very big issue, because again, the world has changed. Every system is managed with tech virtually, just like Conrad rightly said. People use tech in all their offices, but when it comes to church, they decide to use the traditional approach. And so here we'll see that there was clear communication. All right. So what did Jesus say? Hey, his communication was very clear. He said, let the little children come to me. Don't stop them from coming to me. And how did he engage with them? He engaged with them at 3 different levels. All right. First of all, he took the children in his arms, all right, which again, by just carrying them in his hand, shows a level of importance that I value these people. They don't just come to my church, they don't just visit here and just pass on. Even though they come as visitors, I have to engage them in a meaningful way, such that if they come back to UK or to Canada or to US, the only place they will remember worshiping will be my church. Of course, and that level of engagement, because he brought them to his arm, of course, he has to have a kind of high level interaction or contact with them at that level, and all this level of engagement will help, these children. Remember, I'm talking about kids here, right? To just show us that Christ accommodated virtually every different demography, even in his own ministry, right? Because the disciples were like, we don't allow this kind of demography to interact with, with us. And then what kind of program did he develop for these youths? What kind of program did he develop, from that particular passage? Now, his program was that, see, I have an open access program where everybody is welcome in this church. Everybody is accepted. Just come to the church. I remove every barrier to participation. Second thing he did in the program was that he made sure that by including children in the environment, he's promoting intergenerational ministry. So where children have the opportunity to interact, the youth have the opportunity, the professionals and the seniors. So everybody felt welcome in that environment. And of course, we have the youth. All right, remember 1 Timothy 4 verse 12, where Paul was telling Timothy, because it's very likely for people to take you for granted. And he said, don't let anyone look down on you because you are young. All right, but set an example to believers in speech, in conduct, in love, and so on. I see for the youths, the means of communicating to the youth is entirely different from children. All right, because children basically learn by imitation, but when they get to the age of youth, they begin to explore. And now, if we don't understand that this is a different demography, that we need to address this demography separately, then we'll have a very big issue. All right, we have to use empowering language to address this demography. We have to address all their age bias or discrimination concern. Very tough questions they bring, we have to address them. Unfortunately, sometimes, we stay aloof from this demography and then assume that they should keep imitating like those who were the demography of kids, not knowing that they have outgrown the level of kids. Now they have gotten to a place where they are no longer imitating, but they're trying to try out a lot of things. And so if they are not properly guided, a lot of things could go wrong. And so funneling this particular demography into ERP system will actually reveal a lot of insight that ordinarily, might not be able to see. Especially, I love the feature of chat in that ERP, because when people chat, people don't actually know sometimes, that the system kind of aggregates responses and could create a theme. So, for example, a youth demographic could chat for 1 year or for 1 month or 2 months, and then we'll see what are the consistent themes that is predominant in their discussion. And that could provide a very strong leadership direction for the church and say, hey, this is what these children are talking about. This is what this demographic is talking about. And we are not actually doing anything to cater to this particular need. But those kind of insights are not possible to aggregate when they are working in silos. And then the young professional, this is a very interesting demography, because at this level, they are no longer just youth, but now they are beginning to have their own life entirely. And so when we have the young professionals, how do we connect with them as a church? How do we connect with them as a church? Do we build some focus groups, for example? For example, if you notice that within your church, I have 50 persons who are in finance. I have 100 persons who are in academics. So I have 25 persons who are in tech. Besides building the entire team as young professionals in my church, am I able to also build a specific team for those people in finance? Because they understand each other, they know their language they speak, they understand their jargon, the register of their profession is very common to them. So they could relate with each other more at that level. And so you see, even though I have a unified demographic for the young professionals, by using a system like ERP we're talking about, for example, I might be able to see that, hey, I think it's interesting for me to further subdivide this particular group in a way that it is not unproductive. All right, because the major purpose is this: we want to make sure that people are kept engaged, that when people come into the church, that people don't feel that the church does not care about their personal life, that the church does not care about their professional life, that the church only cares about their spiritual life. So when somebody says that I come to a church and this is a church where anything that pertains to my personal life, my professional life, my spiritual life, virtually everything is catered for. It becomes a home for such kind of persons. And of course, for communication, we could it's very unfortunate, for instance, that if you speak to many persons who unfortunately are professionals, and you hear that they are not, for example, on LinkedIn, for instance, right? And you notice that if you see there are some in the church group who already in those platforms are doing massively well. In fact, some are excelling because of the opportunity they find in those platforms. Those persons who are doing well would serve as a model to some other person who are yet to get into those particular spaces. And of course, then program design could be created in a way that there will be leadership seminars, workshop on work-life balance. But the most important thing is for this particular demography, what this demography is interested in is, how can this church help me fulfill my purpose? How can I align what I'm being taught in this church to where I'm going to in life as a person? And that is very important. Once they're able to find that balance, once that particular chasm is bridged, I can tell you they will remain in the church. Again, I strongly, I don't believe. I have a quote on my one of my profile where I said, without data, you can't really see anything. All right. And so if you don't have this kind of demography, seeing what their attitudes are, seeing what their characters are, seeing what they are doing actually on those ERP, we may not be able to know the best way to serve them. And of course, what we call in website bounce rates, where people just visit your website, they don't do anything, they just look at one page and then they just jump out because they don't see what they are looking for. So we have high bounce rate in terms of the number of lives we are impacting in the church. And because of time, I don't want to overshoot the time because I think I was given only 7 minutes or thereabout. And then for seniors, now seniors are a very unique set of persons in our congregation, right? And they there are this particular saying that is always get lonely at the top. And when people get at the seniors level, we think that we don't no longer lead this person, they should just stay on their own. But again, creating a very meaningful community for them, very meaningful groups for them, social gatherings for them, that not just people in their demography participate in, but at times can incorporate both other people from other demographies. For example, you could have an event, that has to do, for example, the youth we are talking about making the right choice in your career. And we have some people within, let me say, the young professionals who are already working on a particular career choice, and then the seniors who are already retired. And we bring these two groups together, joining the youth who are yet to make a career choice, for instance, or who are yet to think of where should I go in. And then they are telling them, this is how I made my decision. Perhaps it could be helpful for you. And, so having that intergenerational bridge where everybody comes together and then sharing their thoughts, sharing their views, will actually also help to increase the engagement of what is going on. Because sometimes the younger generations, the youths at this particular point in time, sometimes they just want to hear from somebody who is a little bit above their age, but not far away. But some of them, again, want to also hear from somebody who has finished almost everything and just waiting and just resting. And so having those two different demographics in the same context will also help to strengthen their conviction that, hey, okay, I think this is a nice place for me. So if I get confused at any time, then I could go to this particular demography and say, hey, I'm stuck. Can you talk to me? But again, we find out that even, I want to say this, which is very important, because sometimes some people think that because somebody is, say, youth, means that he could relate to youth the most. All right. Communication and engagement is a skill that is unique to individuals. And by that, I mean somebody could be a youth and he has by no means no way of communicating with the youth. And you have somebody else who is older, let me say even 30, 40, or 45, who, because of his charisma, has a way of relating with the youth, so much so that they prefer to speak to that person because he is able to communicate in the language they understand. So being in a particular demography as a leader, for example, does not mean that that leader automatically has a charisma to talk to the people within that particular demography. All right. So it's a skill that the person must consciously acquire to be able to deal with the expectation of that particular demography. Again, when I round off with this, when talking about demographics, I look at demography just like a context. When I moved out to Canada here, and the first time I was asked to teach a class, I remember, hey, I've taught in Nigeria a little bit, but I've never taught in Canada, right? And so at the university here, I said, this is a different context. So I'm not expected to use the same method to teach here, right? Because these are different set of persons entirely. 99% are white. So what did I do? The only strategy I retain, which I've been using virtually maybe in every meeting I have with people, is sending them a pre-survey to tell them what are your expectations for this particular class or for this particular session, and just allow me know what they're thinking about and possibly see how I can tinker with what I already created to make sure it kind of also aligns with their objective or what they're thinking about, but not necessarily diverging from what I intended to achieve per se, but making sure that what I'm saying is meaningful to them, that I'm not just speaking to myself, but also speaking to them. And this is very important because you remember in, I think it was Isaiah chapter 43, verse 19, where God said, behold, I'm doing a new thing. Behold, I'm doing a new thing. So changing this, adapting to different contexts and adapting to the needs of different demographies is not an act of kind of weakness, or it's not a sign of compromise, actually. Remember the sons of Issachar who had understanding of the time. It's a sign that, hey, I understand that things are changing, and while I maintain the strong biblical and scriptural footing and tenets, but I have to have the wisdom to understand that now I can no longer control the growth of my church. I can no longer tend to the sheep that God has given me without effectively having a pipeline strategy to cater to each of these demography. So even as we have seen that there are different departments, for example, even within the same, within the ERP, it means that I could choose that even in that department, I could cater for different demographics in that particular department. So that allows me to know what is happening in the teen church, in the youth church, in the teenagers church, and every of this demography. And then again, one thing that is important for me in all this is, at the end of the month or at the end of the year, being able to track how progress have happened, or how discussions have changed, or how interests have changed over time within the month. And I tell you, that could form your decision of a leader for how the church should be driven in the next 1 year, in the next 2 years. And as these things are happening, what happens is just like a recommendation system, right? When people see that, wait, pastor is taking a topic that actually matters to us. How did he know that? He knows that because we have a system that allows us to know what matters to you the most. Because sometimes there are things that members will tell us, there are things they will not tell us. They can just express through writing. All right. And so those will give us strong insight that will allow us to be able to cater to each of these demography. And I know that God has given us the wisdom, as believers, to be able to do that. And so finally, what next? First thing we have to do now is to audit our current demographic engagement. How am I engaging with my demography that I have now? The youth, the teens, the children, how am I engaging with them? The person I have there as a leader, does he understand what this group understands? Does he speak their language? Did I place him there, for example, somebody in children department, did I place him there because he studied child education, or because this person beyond child education really understands or really resonate or connect with what this demography really wants? What is the level of progress I'm getting from the testimony coming within that particular demography? Then we have to develop a persona-based pipeline strategy. All right, and this can only be achieved actually, with a software like ERP, Sophia ERP, right? It is almost impossible where you have a congregation of 500 persons to be able to develop individual persona-based pipeline strategies. It's almost impossible. All right, but if you have a platform where people interact, you can take an aggregation of somebody's interaction and you develop a very strong personal pipeline strategies that will strongly resonate with that particular person. And then we have to train leaders in demographic specific approaches. I mentioned that before. We have to make sure that the leaders who are the person leading in these demographics, they are the people who have not just the experience, but they have the charisma. Charisma is very important in this particular context. Charisma is very important. And lastly, we have to always implement a feedback loop, which by the grace of God, the ERP software can actually help to make all those, feedback loops very much easy and effective. So I think I'll stop here. Hopefully I didn't overshoot my time. I'll take questions now if there are any. Thank you so much.